Good afternoon. Let's do some business. We are doing it live right here and doing more at 4 weekday afternoons. We get right down to business after Ben Shapiro and just before the 790 KBC News Blitz with Randy Wang coming up for you at 5. Mottek On Money live on the air on 790 KBC, streaming live online worldwide at kbc.com and the on-demand Mottek On Money podcast, kbc.com, Apple, iTunes, and all your favorite podcast platforms. Wrapping up the week with the stock market closing mostly lower today. Mixed finish, the Dow seeing a weekly loss and the NASDAQ at a record high. The past week saw investors get the latest news on inflation as well as political uncertainty in Europe, and the latest consumer confidence reading out today was disappointing, suggesting households are struggling. The University of Michigan's consumer confidence reading declined to a 7-month low, indicating consumers may be suffering under the weight of higher interest rates and still elevated consumer prices. The gradual rise in initial jobless claims, elevated job cut announcements, and the decline in job openings also might be affecting sentiment, according to analysts. The Dow Jones Industrial Average coming in for a closing loss today of 58 points. The S&P 500, 2 points lower, off its record high. The NASDAQ, though, managed a closing gain of 21 points, selling at a record high to wrap up the week at 17,689. The Dow posting a fourth straight day of declines, its longest losing streak since April. And the S&P 500 was up 1.6% for the week. The NASDAQ was up 3.2%. Taking a look at the bond market, which has been rallying lately, the bond market ended today's session by rallying for a fourth straight session, sending benchmark bond yields lower. The yield on the 10-year note, for example, has moved down to 4.21%. Looks like shares of the France ETF moved sharply lower today, increasing their decline as stocks in France struggled after the French president called for a sudden election there. The French ETF was down more than 3% this afternoon. The dollar in all this has been rising against other major currencies, including the Japanese yen, moving higher after the Bank of Japan decided to wait a month before dialing back its purchases of government bonds. We've also seen the dollar climb against the euro, even as the spread between French and German bond yields widened to levels not seen in years, amid nervousness ahead of this election coming up in France. Bitcoin took a hit this week. Bitcoin and other cryptos were mixed this week after the Federal Reserve hit hopes for interest rate cuts. And we've seen, looks like the Fed took the steam out of the cryptos. This has the dollar rallied, and Bitcoin is back down to just below 66,000 here at last check. We're also keeping an eye on Ethereum, of course, which is hovering at around 3,477. Ethereum got a pop recently after the Securities Exchange Commission recently approved critical rule changes to allow spot Ethereum exchange-traded funds to trade, but it could still take weeks or even months before issuers receive final permission to launch those products. The price of oil back in the spotlight today, falling slightly, but up for the week. In fact, we saw the price of oil in New York moving lower by 17 cents to $78.45 a barrel. Brent crude in London, the global benchmark, settling at $82.62 a barrel. That was down 13 cents on the day. Oil in New York was up 3.9% for the week, and Brent crude in London was up 3.8% for the week. Inflation, the federal deficit, taxes, all back in the spotlight, too, this week. Looks like there'll be a clear choice in the presidential race when it comes to taxes, with President Biden pledging to raise taxes, former President Trump pledging to lower your taxes if he's reelected in November. I'll talk taxes later this hour with taxpayer advocate Grover Norquist, president of Americans for Tax Reform. Big couple of weeks of high-profile court cases involving President Trump and the president's son, Hunter Biden. Hunter Biden was convicted this week of all 3 felony charges related to the purchase of a revolver in 2018, when prosecutors argued the president's son had lied on a mandatory gun purchase form by saying he was not illegally using or addicted to drugs. The president's son also now facing a second federal trial on charges set to begin September 5th in Los Angeles that are tax-related. We'll get into that and more with prominent Los Angeles attorney Lou Shapiro, specializing in criminal law, joining us live later this hour. But first, on your money, the markets, the economy, and the whole works this week. Joining us live now, investment expert BRYAN Perry, chief investment strategist and portfolio manager at Mint Asset Management at mintassetmanagement.com. BRYAN, thank you very much for taking the call. A big week, a lot of ways. We had that big Fed meeting, of course, where the Fed held the line on short-term rates and came out with a statement on the economy and so forth today that Consumer confidence reading at a 7-month low, and the NASDAQ at a record high. Let's also see Apple hitting record highs this week. Give us your assessment of what we've seen here.
Thank you, Frank. And it was a busy week here on a number of fronts. Most of them were actually pretty good for the market in general here. Certainly the inflation data came in below expectation here, which was a very welcome set of numbers. The Fed basically also cut back their dot plot plan to have 3 rate cuts here this year, cut back to just 1 is what they're anticipating. And right now the market is looking for a September cut. Depends on how these jobless claims go. We had a strong job number last Friday, which reflected May, but the weekly jobless claims here for ending the week of June came in at $242,000, which is or 1,000 claims, which was 13,000 higher, and it's the highest claims number since August 23rd of last year. So something to keep track of here on the labor market here. Today's session was more of a consolidation day. After the market has crested here to new highs here for the NASDAQ and the S&P 500, the Dow's lagging as there's some rotation away from the deep cyclicals here with anticipation that the economy is starting to ebb in terms of its GDP growth. So with that in mind, you've got a narrower market here with the big cap megatechs, which are still leading the way higher here for the NASDAQ. And that was certainly goosed higher by last night's earnings report from Adobe, which came in better than expected. The stock was up 14.5%, sharply higher today. Again, another big cap tech, which matters quite a bit to the Nasdaq. So this is really where the market is still highly focused on, Frank, with this with the AI trade and big cap tech leading the way higher here and really carrying the ball for the rest of the market here at a time when a lot of sectors are starting to lag here. Even financials this week started to roll over here a bit. We saw some very heavy selling in the insurance sector, a lot of the banks here. So things that were working very well here leading up to this month are starting to show some signs of fatigue. And so it's important that people just make sure that you're not complacent about your portfolios, that you're rotating away from weakness and into strength. That's a constant mistake that a lot of investors make, is to not be mindful of that. The inflation data is certainly that started here by the Bank of Canada and the central bank in Europe here is that's starting to lead the way here for the rest of the market here for the central banks, which they do act in a coordinated fashion here. Which you got the BOC in Canada and the ECB rate cuts. It basically is going to start to the ball rolling here for what is going to be a period here of lower interest rates here that I see going forward here. And in doing so, most investors don't appreciate that central banks cannot mandate rate cuts, and they must inject liquidity into the banking system, which normally causes a powerful rally in both stocks and bonds. So when the global monetary base is expanding, it's almost always bullish for stocks and bonds going forward. Against this backdrop, we've got a S&P 500 here at 5340, I think is where we closed today. We've got a clear shot to see the market trade to 5,800 here by year end here, which is about another 7-8% higher than where it currently trades. And this is certainly you've got $6 trillion in dry powder on the sideline. That FOMO trade has not even gotten off the ground yet. So a lot of people are still watching this market and not participating. They're still staying in money markets, which I think are going to start to see those 5% yields are going to start to move toward 4% in money markets. So there's going to be some pressure to get involved in stocks here in the second half of the year if earnings continue to come in, at or better than expected. You also had other things take place this week, like CrowdStrike and KKR got added to the S&P 500. Those stocks did very well on that. And you had Apple basically have a huge week this week based on the fact that there's going to be this global refresh cycle for all things wireless and devices that have to have AI embedded into their software and chips. So this global refresh cycle has really started to take on an enormous narrative here, and it's really helped all the stocks that are in that food chain there. Yeah, I said Tesla, Elon Musk here, getting his $56 billion pay package passed by about 77% of the shareholders here, and they're taking their incorporation out of Delaware and moving to Texas. And speaking of Texas, another big story this week was the Texas Stock Exchange. It looks like this is going to be created here between now and sometime by 2026. There's got good funding here. There's $120 million in funding here, backed by BlackRock and Citadel Securities. The structure will be a fully electronic national securities exchange headquartered in Dallas. And the timeline here is really, again, by 2026, and it'll even have its own listings here. Very friendly CEO approach here, where a lot of CEOs have complained about the high regulatory standards and a lot of restrictions here at the NASDAQ and NYSE. So Texas is a major business hub here. It's home to many Fortune 500 companies here, with more of them moving there every day. So it's an interesting development here that we'll have another exchange here in Dallas in due time. And from that standpoint, I think that's good for business here to spread around the activity. Cryptos, like you mentioned, had a very tough week here. The dollar was strong, and inflation data was tame. But with the dollar being strong right now, just some of that money came off when it couldn't penetrate 70,000 Bitcoin. Then you had a lot of leverage come off of that because there was a lot of leverage going into that trade, looking for it to break out and go higher. So that came off, and that's really the last but most important thing is this AI revolution is for real, and it's a generational trade for investors to really seize this time here, because when we do get some periods of consolidation here, like we saw yesterday with Broadcom, a huge breakout there, and another 10-for-1 stock split, which has now become fashionable, these big stock splits. This is really a great time for investors here to really build their net worth in this particular cycle here. And this is probably a 2 to 3 year cycle here. It may be fully priced to perfection here by this time next year. It's hard to say. But the money is being spent. We're going from $300 billion in invested capital in AI this year to as much as $1 trillion to $2 trillion by the end of the decade. So along the way there, you're going to get a lot of money made in these stocks that, they've made good runs. Some of them have, but there's more to go. And I would use any bouts of weaknesses in the market from geopolitical events or other types of events that can, pull the market down for a ways to initiate and add to positions in AI, and stay in the big positions here, stay in the big names, because that's what's working, and that's what's going to continue to lead.
Excellent assessment. We're on the air live with investment expert Bryan Perry with the MintAssetManagement.com, author, by the way, of the 25% cash machine. And of course, the week started with NVIDIA with that 10-for-1 stock split, traded around 121 at the beginning of the week. Now is at 131. And of course, Apple's been on that run recently after it got on the AI bandwagon, hitting record highs, selling a bit lower today off its record high at 212 and change. NVIDIA at 131 and change. Where do you see NVIDIA go from here following that stock split this week?
Well, there's numbers now that are as high as 200. I think certainly 150 looks like that's in the bag, and we're not that far away from that now. You're currently closed at 131, spot 45 today. Certainly going to get there. They still have a very big lead. AMD has yet to really get in the game yet. There's a lot of promise there, but they really haven't delivered any major chips that can even anywhere compete with NVIDIA's. So that's the world is their oyster to this point, and they're going to be releasing Blackwell here shortly here, and they already had a schedule on that. They're already planning a second version of Blackwell after the first version of Blackwell. So NVIDIA is the king, and it is truly leading the way here. I think it can probably see 150 relatively soon, and then probably go through a long digestion period of maybe 2 or 3 months, and then look for the stock to make a run here by the end of the year with maybe a $180 to $200 price target, Frank.
Very interesting. Okay, and price of gold got a pop today too, up more than $30 at $2,348, and this despite the strength in the dollar. What do you see here with gold and silver as well?
Well, again, I'll make that note that it looks like the central banks are going to have to inject a lot of money in the system, and they do that because they want to avoid a recession. Okay, even if they're lowering interest rates because inflation's coming down, but they're also the economy's slowing because there's a lot of data out there that shows that, especially in manufacturing and durable goods. So with that being said, then you've got if the systems, and a lot of currencies were weaker around the world, especially emerging markets, which are getting pretty notably crushed around there. Brazil, Mexico. There's been a lot of certainly political changes there, but those currencies are under attack. And so with that being said, you have I think a very strong bid under gold and silver at this point in time. I think that you use any bouts of weakness here to accumulate gold and silver. going into this, because you're going to see more liquidity come into the system on the global monetary system, and you just have uncertainty, global uncertainty, with a lot of political changes taking place in Europe that you noted here. Other right-wing parties are starting to swoop in and take other parliaments, and certainly down south, the change in Mexico. She's a very progressive leftist, and also over in Brazil. Brazil's had a really tough time here with their market here. Again, a lot of socialist agendas moving in in that country as well. So gold is it's a great harbinger of safety and during times of uncertainty. And even though we have this great AI trade on, there's this bifurcation between other things that are not so certain around outside of our borders.
All right. Well, you have the chance here, Brian Perry. Let me ask you the big question here now. Where are you putting money now and or taking it off the table?
Well, again, in terms of the AI portfolio, people really need to take note here. You're going to, on any weakness here, certainly NVIDIA, Microsoft, Broadcom, Apple, Oracle had great numbers here. Today, I was buying Supermicro Computer, SMCI, which makes these liquid-cooled servers here for NVIDIA. Amazon picking up some of that here. Western Digital, WDC. Also some Qualcomm here. Apple chose Qualcomm to continue to, supply them with their Snapdragon chips there for the iPhone, next generation iPhones here. Apple's kind of abandoned their own chip making effort, so that looks good here. And silver, SLV, looks good here. I'm buying also Spotify right here, SPOT. They're raising their subscription number cost. Reddit came out recently here. RDDT ran up to 70, pulled back here at around 61. That looks like a buy. Robinhood looks good here, HOOD. And taking off, all the insurance companies they're just really showing signs of material weakness here. So it's like Allstate, Prudential, Travelers, the regional banks, KRE. That sector is right on the lips of the 200-day moving average. Breaks there, it's going lower. And there's just more news that there's about $427 billion of refinancing coming due on corporate office properties here over the next 6 months. That's got that sector nervous. And lastly, floating rate assets here. If the Fed's going to start to bring rates down, then all those floating rate assets out there that are tied to, short-term interest rates, they're going to start to not pay as much interest. So I think that, and all things floating rate are going to start to, and it's a good time to start trimming in that area. You don't have to sell everything, but it's a good time to start trimming.
All right, Brian. Wish we had more time. We'll have to stop there. Terrific to speak with you. Thank you very much for taking the call here this afternoon. That is investment expert Brian Perry, Chief Investment Strategist and Portfolio Manager at Mint Asset Management at mintassetmanagement.com. Also author of the 25% Cash Machine. Brian, we wish you a great weekend and look forward to speaking with you again very soon.
Always good being with you, Frank. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Out to the freeways now. Gorgeous afternoon here in Southern California. Let's get the latest on your ride at 790 KABC. Can you believe it? Summer's coming. The days are long, weather is warmer, and swarms of tourists crowding our streets and freeways. And the pace may be slower, but traffic is heavier, in case you hadn't noticed. You might be traveling, but with travel, you're driving in an unfamiliar place. And while you're having fun in paradise, unfortunately, accidents do happen. Now, if you've been hurt in an accident at home or away from home, don't let it ruin your trip or your summer. Call the compassionate team at Fielding Law Firm. Clark Fielding understands the disruption and frustration that comes with being injured in an accident that was not your fault. Clark is dedicated to getting you the justice and compensation you deserve, whether it's a car accident, slip, trip, fall, dog bite, or any kind of personal injury. Fielding Law is here to fight for you. Clark Fielding and his team of legal sharks at Fielding Law will help carry the burden so you can focus on recovering. You'll be treated like family. Fielding Law is a local firm that is familiar with the freeways and trouble spots out there. Clark Fielding lives right here, too. Don't let your summer be overshadowed by an accident. Call Fielding Law Firm today for a free consultation so you can focus on getting back to enjoying life under the sun. The number to call, 833-88-SHARK. That's 833-88-SHARK. Your path to brighter days ahead. ClarkTheSharkLaw.com. 790 KBC. Welcome ZZ Top coming to the Bank of America Performing Arts Center October 29. Tickets are on sale now at Ticketmaster.com. And right now, caller 9 wins at 1-888-795-2222. You can get a pair of tickets to the show if you're caller 9. Tickets furnished by Nederlander Concerts. Call right now. Caller 9 wins 1-888-795-2222. Mottek On Money continues here in 790 KBC. Mixed finish to the week on Wall Street. The Dow pulling back 58 points at 38,589. The S&P 500 down 2 off its record high at 5,432. The NASDAQ, the star of the day and the star of the week, up 21 points, selling at a record high to close out the week at 17,000. 689. The yield in the 10-year note has eased. This week, we saw a bond market rally. The price of gold popping today more than $30 higher at $2,348.90 an ounce. Silver down 55 cents at $29.62. The price of oil slipping slightly today, down 13 cents at $78.49 a barrel in New York, but up for the week. NVIDIA moving higher today at more than $2 at $131.88, following a 10-for-1 stock split earlier this week. Apple hitting record highs this week, pulling back today down $1.75 at $212.49. Adobe, big mover on the upside today at more than $66 at $525.31. Checking the cryptos now, we see a Bitcoin having a rough week, down about 800 now at 65,975. Ethereum, let's see if we can bring that one up here. Ethereum is looking a bit lower as well today, but right now popping $72 to 3,483 Doge at 13 cents. And now the latest news here on 790 KABC. Mottek On Money continues here, 790 KABC. Happy Flag Day 2024. Yeah, it was on this date back in 1777 that the Stars and Stripes became the official flag of the United States. Happy Flag Day. And we're heading into the Father's Day holiday weekend. Happy Father's Day to all the dads out there. Meanwhile, inflation, the federal deficit, taxes, all back in the spotlight this week. Looks like consumer confidence took a hit this week. And this month, according to the latest survey from the University of Michigan Consumer Confidence Survey, with inflation very much a concern for you, the consumer out there. And it looks like there's a clear choice in the presidential race when it comes to taxes, with President Biden pledging to raise taxes, former President Trump pledging to lower taxes if he's reelected in November. Let's talk taxes now with taxpayer advocate Grover Norquist, president of Americans for Tax Reform, who put that group together with President Reagan years ago, and we certainly honor his memory. Grover Norquist, thank you very much for coming to the line here this afternoon.
Absolutely. Enjoy being with you.
Thank you. Likewise, Grover. Take it from the top and tell us what we need to know here. You got a front row seat there in Washington. What's the latest on tax talk and what we need to know at this point?
Well, usually not too much happens in Washington, but just in the last 2 days, President Trump was here and he spoke to the Republican members of the House of Representatives, to the Republican senators, to the Business Roundtable, all the CEOs of the major Fortune 500 companies, and he talked taxes. He walked through his plans. He said he wants to make permanent the tax cuts that were enacted in 2017. Those were lower rates for all Americans. If you paid taxes, your tax rate went down, whether you were highest, lowest, middle, all tax rates went down. And you saw the doubling of the per-child tax credit and full expensing, so that businesses, when they build new factories and new equipment and so on, they don't pay taxes on the money they don't have because they bought a tractor, right? So you expense it, like the way you would for labor costs. If you hired somebody, you don't pay taxes on that person's income, you expense it. So great tax cut, a lot of growth that flowed from that. Reagan says we want to make Reagan. How about Trump says he wants to make that permanent? And he added a couple of things. He wants to take the corporate rate, which is 21% now, a little lower than China's, right? He wants to take it to 20, keep it lower than China's. Biden wants to take it up to 28, higher than communist China. So if you run a business in communist China, the government will steal less of it than if Biden's president and he gets to decide. You can imagine why in the world would you start a business in the United States as opposed to China if the federal government's going to start off by making you poorer than you would have been if you invested in China. That's one of the reasons under Biden we've been having some of our problems. He hasn't been able to bring those rates up because the Republicans haven't let him, but he says he wants to if he gets power. Trump says, nope, we're going to go to 20 and lower, not higher. That's extremely helpful because, look, the corporate income tax is not paid by General Motors. The corporate income tax is paid by consumers because prices go up, and it's paid by workers because if a company come into a company and says, taking $1 million from this company, well, we don't have as much to pay people. Guess who's getting a pay cut? And retirees who are invested in companies across America and their 401ks and individual retirement accounts and in their pensions, retirees pay the corporate income tax. There is no Mr. General Motors. There are consumers who pay General Motors when they buy a car, and there are workers who work at General Motors, and there are people whose pensions are invested in General Motors. Those people all suffer from the corporate income tax, but no, Mr. General Motors. Corporations do not pay taxes. People do. That's a very powerful statement that the president was making. And he added a really interesting twist. When he was in Nevada, and he repeated it here in D.C. a couple of days ago in Nevada, he said, you know what? We shouldn't have federal income tax on tipped income. If you're a restaurant waiter or waitress or an Uber driver and you get tips, that part of your income should be tax-free. And that really resonated in a state like Nevada with so many people in the hospitality business. The Democrats poo-pooed it because they don't care. And the unions didn't care because the unions don't like tips because unions want everybody to work on an hourly basis. So everybody's treated exactly the same. And the hardest working person makes no more money than the person who can barely be bothered to show up for work. The unions feel if they get rid of tips, then they can unionize a restaurant. You can't unionize a restaurant if people get tips and know who works harder than other people. And they want to get compensated on working harder and better and smarter and all those sorts of things. So this is a very interesting idea. I think it will be the law of the land a year from now. No taxes on tips. And at Americans for Tax, from our website, her.org, we've got a great collection of people who've taken pictures of their receipts at a restaurant where they put a tip in and they say, vote for Trump. He will not be taxing your tips in the future. And then they send that out on Twitter. So we have a collection of those that people can take a look at and let all the waiters and waitresses know that if they vote for Trump, they will not be paying taxes on their tips. And if they elect Biden, they will be paying taxes on their tips.
Waiters and waitresses, or as they're known here in Los Angeles, actors and actresses. We are on the air live with taxpayer advocate Grover Norquist, president of Americans for Tax Reform. Now, we did get some new readings on the federal budget this week, right, Grover? The government recording a $347 billion May budget deficit, up sharply from the deficit a year earlier. How are things looking on the deficit front?
Well, the economy is not as strong as it should be. The government's spending entirely too much money. They passed that bill, the Inflation Reduction Act, remember, the one that didn't reduce inflation? And that one gave a lot of crony capitalism, a lot of checks out to businesses that if you did what the president wanted you to, you would get a tax credit or spending. And it turns out that the amount of money that Biden gave away in corporate welfare was 2 or 3 times higher than the budget said. Now, normally, if you were in a real, you said, well, we're going to build a factory and it turns out it's going to cost 3 times as much, you stop and rethink what you're doing. Not the government. They said, well, we promised to buy, pay for this, and if it costs more, it just comes out of the budget. And that's what's shooting up both spending and deficit spending, is all that green tax credit stuff, electric vehicles for rich people to buy expensive electric cars, and that's a much bigger subsidy for the rich than Biden had said it was going to be. I think, did he lie or did he not know what he was doing? One or the other. It's a real problem, and it is interesting to see the party that says they care about low-income people raise taxes on low-income people and send subsidies to rich people who can buy interesting cars.
They're live with taxpayer advocate Grover Norquist. So here we are, Grover Norquist. Anything else we got from that meeting with President Trump and the Republican leaders there? Anything else coming out of that meeting?
Well, politically, it was very interesting. The president endorsed the former governor of Maryland, who's a Democrat, who's not a big fan of Trump's, but it was Trump being big tent in his said, I like him. He's a good guy. I hope he gets elected. So Trump is running a campaign not just for the presidency, but he realizes he needs to have a Republican Senate and a Republican House if he's going to get the tax cuts, the spending restraint, and the deregulation that he wants. And so that's a very helpful thing when you have a presidential candidate who spends the time and makes the effort to help elect not just himself, but other people as well.
Grover Norquist, thank you very much for coming to the line this afternoon. That is taxpayer advocate Grover Norquist, president of Americans for Tax Reform. Happy Flag Day, Grover, and thanks again for joining us live here this afternoon.
Absolutely.
Right out to the freeways now, 790 KBC. Mottek On Money continues here in 790 KBC. Politics and the legal system intertwined like we've never seen before. Attorneys have been keeping busy these days. Big couple of weeks of high-profile court cases involving former President Trump and the president's son, Hunter Biden. Hunter Biden convicted this week of all 3 felony charges related to the purchase of a revolver in 2018 when prosecutors argue the president's son lied on a mandatory gun purchase form by saying he was not illegally using or addicted to drugs. The president's son also now facing a second federal trial on tax charges here in Los Angeles, set to begin on September 5th. Well, let's start with that and bring in prominent Los Angeles attorney Lou Shapiro, specializing in criminal justice. Lou Shapiro, thank you very much for coming to the line this afternoon.
Absolutely. Always good to be with you, Frank.
Fantastic to have you on the air live with us here on Mottek On Money on 790 KBC. Give us your thoughts, first of all, on the Hunter Biden case that came about this week with that verdict.
Well, look, to be fair, I think everybody expected a pretty quick guilty verdict on the matter. It's not every day when you have a defendant who writes a book basically confessing to the whole crime ahead of time. So it was a slam dunk case for the prosecution. I think the overarching question by a lot of people is, should have resources gone into that trial, and should resources have gone into the previous Trump trial that we all had? And are they canceling each other out? What political consequences do they have? I think that's the bigger question and issue that are on voters and citizens' minds.
Right, and now Hunter Biden facing a second federal trial that'll be here in Los Angeles, federal tax charges. Trial set to begin September 5th, and in the meantime, he's set to be sentenced right on this first conviction here. Let me get your thoughts on what that sentence might be and what's ahead on this second go-round.
So because he doesn't have any previous convictions of this kind, this matter was not violent. Nobody got hurt. There was drug addiction issues involved, which generally judges show compassion towards. So I expect he will be getting some sort of a probationary sentence, which includes community service and probably drug counseling and so forth. Going to the second upcoming tax trial that we have coming up, again, if he can make restitution, if he is convicted and he needs to pay back a certain amount to the IRS, then so long as he makes restitution ahead of sentencing, I also expect the judge is not going to be sentencing him to any time. Again, for the same reason, not violent, nobody got physically hurt, doesn't have a previous record of anything like this, eligible for probation.
All right, the other news this week, Hunter Biden agreeing to drop a civil lawsuit against Rudy Giuliani, America's mayor and former attorney for President Trump. Also, Giuliani's former attorney, according to a court filing. The president's son last year had accused Giuliani and the other attorney of violating computer fraud and data access laws, alleging they manipulated data from his devices or storage platforms, namely that laptop that we've seen so much on. What's your reaction to that news this week?
Well, it's really not surprising. I think Hunter Biden is trying to make the play that he is the victim of a witch hunt in this whole situation, and that by him doing anything going on the offensive would take away from that narrative. So I think that's what his play is on this. It's just letting that go, moving forward on his other matters, and trying to say, just please, everybody, would you just leave me alone? This is a waste of taxpayer money and a waste of attention on little old me. I'm a nobody.
They're live with Los Angeles attorney Lou Shapiro, specializing in criminal justice. And let me ask you now about former President Trump following his conviction and upcoming sentencing. What's the expectation there?
So that's going to be very interesting. I think the judge is torn on him because on one hand, you have someone who is the former president of the United States of America who has no criminal record. And again, there was a nonviolent offense. Nobody got hurt. There was no financial loss, even in a sense here. The question is how far the judge will take the prosecution's theory that this constituted election fraud. If the judge puts a lot of weight on that terminology and feels that this payoff, this bearing of the story, changed the whole trajectory of the election, and it robbed voters of having being able to make an informed decision about who they were voting for, maybe he could justify some time. Not a lot of time, but some time. But I think if you ask most legal analysts and experts in the field and those who practice in that geographic area, they are not expecting a custodial sentence on that one.
What kind of a bombshell would that be if President Trump is sentenced to prison?
Oh, it would be huge. I think we would see riots. I think we would see a huge uproar. I think it would definitely affect the upcoming election because as it is, a lot of people, even the middle of the road voters, are sort of scratching their heads saying, I'm not happy with what he was shown to have done, but do I think my taxpayer money should have been used on it? Do I think so much attention should have been placed on this? Should it have even gone to trial? That I think a lot of people have reservations about. So if it goes even further than that, where he's put into some kind of custodial setting, I don't think it's going to fare well with most middle of the road voters.
All right, now the other case that he's dealing with is the charges that the former president illegally retained classified documents in his home in Florida. So this now is the case, the only case with ongoing proceedings, right? So he has to give attention to that. How do you expect that to play out in the midst of all the other situations here?
Well, the classified documents case is a complicated one because, again, it's unprecedented. No one's been prosecuted for it. And there is a lot of leeway to argue I was in the process of returning the documents, like we're seeing it on the Biden side, right? Biden was also found to have classified documents. He apparently was just a little bit more forthcoming and cooperative with the government in terms of returning them. Had Trump been more cooperative from the get-go, maybe he would be in this situation. But if you're going to argue it was politically motivated, he would have been in this situation regardless of how he acted. But going to the bigger picture of what punishment he would face if he was convicted of, withholding or holding on to classified documents, again, it just nobody got hurt, no previous record. It's something that can be rectified by just giving them back over. Former president of the United States of America also doesn't really add up to a custodial sentence.
All right, in 30 seconds or less, what about that Georgia case, this electioneering case against former president in Georgia?
That's very problematic. If he goes down on that Georgia case, and that has what's called under a RICO statute a mandatory minimum of 5 years, that could be very difficult for him to deal with. We'll need a little bit more than 30 seconds next time on that one, Frank.
Yeah, well, you've covered as much as we could possibly cover in the time we have today. Los Angeles attorney Lou Shapiro, thank you very much for taking the call live with us here this afternoon, and we'll pick up where we left off and continue to follow these cases with you here. Thank you very much. Have a great weekend.
You too. Have a great weekend, my man.
Thank you very, very much. And coming up next, the 790 KBC News Blitz with Randy Wang. And we wish all the fathers out there happy Father's Day. I'll be back with more at 4 on Monday for you right here on Mottek On Money, 790 KBC.
Hey guys, welcome to the Candy Valentino Show. I'm Candy Valentino. I was a founder before I could legally order a drink. And for more than 2.5 decades, I've built, scaled, acquired, and exited multiple businesses in diverse industries. Now my goal is to help you by sharing the knowledge that I've learned, the mistakes that I've made, and the wisdom that I've developed over my journey. Bi-weekly episodes every Monday and Thursday.
The Candy Valentino Show, wherever you listen.